So Epictetus was a Greek philosopher from the 2nd century of this common era. And he once offered the following as it pertains to our relationships with others. He said, be selective about whom you take on as friends, colleagues, and neighbors. All of these people can have an effect on your destiny. The world is full of agreeable and talented folk. The key is to keep company with only people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best. But remember that our moral influence is a two-way street, and we should thus make sure by our own thoughts, words, and deeds to be a positive influence on those we deal with. The real test of personal excellence lies in the attention we give to the often neglected small details of our conduct. Make it your business to draw out the best in others by being an exemplar yourself. You know, those words seem to create a vision of what the best of our relationships can look like. You know, a vision that can be at the forefront of our minds as we go about making our decisions and setting our intentions about entering into the various relationships in our lives. Keeping thoughts of attracting people who will lift us up and call forth our best, and knowing that that is a two-way street. I think the rubber sort of meets the road, though, when Epictetus pointed out the often neglected small details of our conduct. And to me, those words are a reminder that we're not perfect. You know, we're not. We're not supposed to be. We make mistakes. We make mistakes in every area of our lives, including in our relationships. But more often than not, mistakes can be corrected. Wounds can be healed. Relationships can continue to prosper. And so today we're going to look at how we can improve the ways in which we show up, such that our lives and our relationships are as true as possible to those original intentions that we set and the vision offered to us centuries ago. So it might help us to begin by taking a look at what many of us, I believe, learned from our earliest days about our behavior, about how we show up. So many cultures, including ours, have operated with a system that is retributive in nature. In practice, you know, there is the righteous and there's the sinner. One person is right, the other person is wrong. Someone is good, someone else is bad. There's either a reward or there is a punishment. And we see it in a lot of places. I mean, it is present in our court systems, it's present in our prisons, it's present in many churches and the theological teachings that they offer. I mean, I remember growing up as a little girl and getting into trouble like little children will do. And I can't tell you how many times I heard, God's watching you. God knows what you did, young lady, so don't you dare think about lying. God is going to punish you. Usually I had that index finger working, you know, at the same time. So what did a lot of us learn? Well, I learned that God was the CEO of punishment. You know, we learned that not only was this retribution going to happen to us here, oh no, it was also going to happen to us in the next world. And so the best we could do is try to shape up and hope for the best. And the problem, one problem with that, was that we didn't learn from our mistakes. What we learned was that we were bad, instead of learning how to understand why we did what we did, understand that undesirable effect that it can have on our lives and the lives of those around us. And yet, it's not like our culture didn't have a clue, or didn't have any guidance to follow that looked differently. I mean, our Greek philosopher friend offered a vision in the 2nd century. And then, you know, Jesus, many of the indigenous cultures have offered alternative pathways that have emphasized things like healing and grace and forgiveness. And what do those things teach us? Well, they've taught us that the mistakes that we make, the hurt and the harm that we bring to others in our relationships, they can be such wonderful opportunities for transformation. And not just for the harmer, opportunities for transformation for whomever it is that's been hurt. And sometimes it extends even to, opportunities for transformation into our greater communities at large. When we approach our relationships from what I'll call, the Jesus perspective, from our highest and best self, as Epictetus noted, we're no longer in a retributive system. We are now in a restorative system, one that wants to restore a relationship in lieu of just placing blame or exacting punishment in some way. I read an article recently that said you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. And isn't that so true? If we don't talk about the hurt that has happened, if it isn't spoken and heard, it doesn't just magically go away. It needs to be acknowledged for the truths that it holds and for the responsibility and the accountability that needs to take place. And that can be done without devolving into bitterness or resentment or holding grudges forever and a day. It can be done when we call upon some of the earliest teachings from the spiritual masters and the philosophers and the mystics, teachings that in one way or another take us back to what we would call spirit or some other word you want to use for a higher power, ways that include things like prayer and forgiveness, and listening and love. As I was doing some reading and research for today, I was led to various articles about this concept of restorative systems. And many of them make references to the cultures such as the Native American, Lakota, and Navajo tribes, and also the Maori people of New Zealand. And I came upon a Navajo ceremony that focuses on healing and justice when wrongs have been committed that I wanted to share with you today, because I believe that following its elements, its steps, with an understanding of the meaning and the purpose for each one can really be a powerful practice for us to use in our interactions and our relationships with others. And so just for your information, the information I'm going to share was pulled from two different websites. One was the Minnesota Department of Education, and the other was the United States Department of Justice, their Office of Justice Programs. And so I'm going to start by trying to do my very best to replicate the online voice I heard that pronounced the name of the ceremony. And so bear with me here. I'm going to do this very phonetically. It is called Hashuji Natayana. Hashuji Natayana. And Hashuji translates to mean blessing way, all that is good. And Natayana means peacemaker. And so when you put them together, it means peacekeeping. And so this is a peacekeeping ceremony that the Navajo use. And it is a process that embodies both the prevention of and the response to any harm or hurt. And so from the perspective of prevention, it is the Navajo clan. It is the parents and the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles that help to prevent harm from happening by teaching and training the children into the culture, into the traditions and the ways of being, the values of the Navajo people. When harm does occur, the response is that of talking together as a means to restore, improve, reform people's relationships with each other. And there's a very strong emphasis placed on something they call ki. And it's defined as solidarity and kinship. And it was noted that it is to help restore the dignity and worth of the person who did harm by helping them to be responsible and accountable for what they have done.
restore the dignity and the worth of a person. That's a little bit different than being threatened with the wrath of God, is it not? Doesn't that just feel better? So there are 5 elements to the Navajo ceremony. And as I go through them, you can see that they are cumulative. You take them in the order in which they are presented. And throughout this process, there is a Natanana. There is an elder, a peacemaker, who is kind of the facilitator of the entire ceremony. And so the first element is something very familiar to all of us. It is prayer. And the prayer is one that would come from the Navajo traditions. And it serves a couple of purposes. The first purpose is that the prayer is used to call upon and summon the aid of the supernatural forces. And the second purpose of the prayer is that it is used to help frame the attitudes and the relationships of the parties at odds and prepare them for the process they were about to embark upon. So have you ever gone into a difficult conversation without taking time to center yourself? Take a moment just in the silence or for a moment of prayer. And if you have, think about how entering into that conversation could have been made easier. Maybe it was made easier the next time when you did pause to take a breath or two. When you did pause to just say a prayer. Maybe call our silent unity prayer ministry and ask them to say a prayer with you. Prayerful preparation is so key to setting that intention for the highest and best of yourself and everyone else concerned to be brought forth. And of course, that's especially true when there are times of conflict, when there are times of having been hurt or harmed in some way. So after the prayer, the next element they move into is called the expression of feelings. And here, everybody has a say about what happened. And they express not only what they saw happen, their perspective of what happened, they also all get the chance to say how they feel about what happened. And the peacemaker is there and he listens and explores the position of each party. He verifies that they are in a state of disharmony, decides how or why they are out of harmony, and determines if they are ready to attain the solidarity and kinship noted a moment or two ago. Are they ready for that restoration of dignity and worth, along with the responsibility and the accountability for what has happened? Now, when I was reading these aspects of this peacekeeper, this peacemaker's role, and how much responsibility that this step holds, it really brought home to me the importance of this step. I mean, how could even an elder, this wise, older, tradition-laden elder of the Navajo tribe, how could he be able to discern all that he does if there wasn't time devoted to listening to everyone speak, actively listening to all of the stories, all of the perspectives, and especially the feelings pertaining to what each person involved had experienced? If we think about that, it really just stands to reason that if we want a relationship of ours to be healed, to be improved, to be healthy, you have to know how I feel, and I need to know how you feel. That is how relationships get restored. That is how relationships become and have a better chance of remaining healthy. So next comes the lecture. Now, I've had many lectures in my life, but they rarely sounded like the one from the Navajo tradition. See, the Navajo lecture is more about receiving guidance from the peacemaker. It's a time of teaching. The lecture will speak to things such as how or why the parties violated the Navajo values, how they have breached the solidarity of being a member of the clan, of the tribe, how they are out of harmony. The elder will pull from the stories of old. He will go back to the traditions, to the customs, to the culture, to the values, the ceremonies, the rites, the rituals, and he will apply them to the situation at hand. After the lecture comes discussion. And the discussion is framed where the participants are the elder, the peacemaker, the parties involved, and their families. And they all just get together and they talk it out. They just talk it out. They talk about what happened. And more importantly, they talk about the underlying causes of what happened. So it's in this phase or this element that all of the teachings of the lecture are applied so that there can be understanding as to how and why something was done, how it brought the harm and the hurt that it did, how that harm impacted so many others. And then from that point, you move into the element of reconciliation. See, this is where the peacemaker helps the parties figure out a plan. He sits with them and they devise a plan to end the dispute. And end means end. An end that is lasting in nature. That's the plan that they want to get to through reconciliation. And this is one that I don't think we use enough in our world today. You know, in our world, in our culture, it's more of a winner-take-all mentality, right? I was wrong, you were wrong, that's it. And what happens when that's it? You know, the problems either don't go away, or the underlying causes certainly don't go away, or if they do for a time, they just come back in very short order, more often than not. But with reconciliation, you work to resolve the conflicts that exist beneath these surface level ongoing times of discord. When I read about things like that or think about them, I often think about the analogy of spouses and the cap to the toothpaste tube. You know, let's say if the wife, leaves the cap off the toothpaste tube and the husband walks into the bathroom and sees it and just blows up at her in anger. And not about toothpaste. And you don't have to be a trained therapist to know that something bigger than that toothpaste tube cap is bothering him, right? Now, I didn't have the exact situation myself. I had a similar situation many years ago, but not with toothpaste. Mine involved a bread pan. I was married, and I walked into, and I'm going to preface that, just say we were in troubling times at that time. But I walked into the kitchen one day and I saw that my then husband had washed, the dishes that had been in the sink and dried and put them away, except for the bread pan that I had used. And I just turned to, he was sitting right there in the living room, and I just turned to him and I said, why didn't you wash the bread pan? The fire and the fury that came back at me, I can remember just being stunned. My breath was taken away, I couldn't move. It had absolutely nothing to do with washing dishes or bread pans, but just my asking that question triggered him in such a way to unleash in such a way at me that I knew right then and there, in that moment, that the marriage was over. That's when I made my decision that the marriage was going to end. There was no coming back. There was no reconciliation possible after that display. And while I have had zero regrets about decisions I made at that time in my life, I have at times wondered. I've wondered if that whole experience and all that led up to that experience could have been avoided. Could the marriage have been healed, restored to what it had been for more than 19 years? Had both of us known more about how to communicate, how to express our feelings civilly, how to be in a relationship where different perspectives were sometimes going to be present. If we had those skill sets at that time, maybe we would have made it the final element of the Navajo peacekeeping process, which is consensus. See, so after the prayer, after all the venting, after the discussion, after the remembrance of tradition and values and teachings, after the uncovering of all the underlying causes and behaviors, there is consensus on how to move forward. A practical plan for resolution to the problem is put in writing and the parties sign it. The Navajo believe that it is this step, this element of consensus, that makes this peacekeeping ceremony a healing, restorative process, not retributive in any way. Make it your business to draw out the best in others by being an exemplar yourself. I offer those words from the Epictetus again, with which we started this lesson. And I do so because as powerful as the Navajo peacekeeping ceremony seems to be, feels to be, it feels as though it's not going to be something that you just rush through over a cup of coffee with someone, right? Each step is so deliberate. Each element has such depth of meaning. Every single part of it is sacred. And some of those steps, maybe you'll agree with me in thinking that they might be challenging to move through, and not just at a surface level, it's challenging throughout every aspect, all levels of our beings. Now, I don't know if this would be the case. I couldn't find anything about this wondering of mine, but I would be surprised if more than one ceremony session might be needed in order to reach that point of consensus between or amongst some people. And yet, as long as we put off making our business about being the exemplar of what it means to show up in life and to show up as our highest and best selves, expressing in ways that don't harm, don't hurt other people, then we're going to need the Navajo ceremony and others like it. And so I then thought to myself, well, what's the easiest way that I can maybe come up with to explain what showing up as our best self means? And I found what I thought to be a really good and powerful answer. I found it in the Bible. It comes out of the book of Ephesians, and it's the opening words to the 5th chapter. What's the easiest way to show up as our best selves? It says, be imitators of God and walk in love. Be imitators of God and walk in love. And you know that vengeful God we can read so much about from mostly the Old Testament books of the Bible? Well, I heard a phrase one time said that when Jesus arrived, he basically asked us to let that God grow up in our minds, in our hearts, in our beliefs. To let that God grow up, to see Spirit as a loving presence, not a vengeful one, not one that's sitting around on a cloud, just one to punish people and assign retribution, but one whose love would transform our hearts, one whose love would take shape and inform through Jesus and his teachings of healing, his teachings of radical forgiveness. Someone who knew that we cannot be led to the highest level of motivation by being taught the lowest. This presence, this God, this Spirit, whatever you want to call it, but whatever the name is of love, will always and forever be the model of the highest, which means that we can always and forever choose to imitate it and be exemplars.